Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast, a Sunday edition of the show, June 30th. We're getting this in at the last minute for the month of June. And that's because this week, Eric, Oregon went from 9 verbal commitments outside the top 25 in the team rankings by 24/7 Sports to 14 total verbal commitments, meaning they added 5 more guys. And they jumped from 29th Monday morning to 5th in the country Saturday afternoon following the 5th verbal commitment. And there might be more. Like, we're recording a podcast Sunday morning, and let's just be honest, like, there is another verbal commitment coming on this afternoon, and it might be for Oregon. We don't know yet. Michaela, 4-star linebacker from California, Texas A&M, Oregon. I believe USC is the other school, but they're not really in it.
They're lingering.
Yes, it's Oregon and it's Oregon and A&M here, and Mikhail may pick Oregon, and he may pick A&M, but we're recording this before his commitment comes out at 1 p.m. Pacific time, a couple hours before this. But we just need to get this up just because a lot has happened in the last week. It started off with a verbal commitment from 4-star cornerback Brandon Finney, Owling Mills High School, or McDonough High School in Owling Mills, Maryland. Excuse me, I'm all over the place. A top 220 player, 25th best player in the country, the 4th best at his position, the 4th best player in the state of Maryland. And then a very, very late turn of tides here. Josiah Sharma looked like he was heading to Texas, and then a last-minute late switch committed to Oregon from Folsom, California, a defensive tackle, a 3-star player. And that same day, Jordan Davidson committed to Oregon from Mater Dei High School in Southern California, a 4-star running back, a top 200 player in the country. And then Saturday, there's another double dip into the commitment pool. Start off with the Prehm, a 4-star tight end, a top 5 player nationally at his position, almost a top 100 player, ranked 102nd in the country. He committed to Oregon, and then maybe the biggest surprise in a while, no one knew this was coming, 4-star recruit and 24/7 Sports composite 5-star cornerback Dorian Brew, who's now the highest rated commit in the class. He joined the fray from Conroe High School in Texas, a 6-foot corner, 7th best player at the position nationally, 61st best player overall. He commits to Oregon, and in a string of 5 days, or a string of a week, 5 verbal commitments, a composite 5-star, multiple top 247 prospects, and a lot of holes to be filled. And all of a sudden, Oregon's class went from like, hey, like, things are going good, but once the snowball starts, this class could jumpstart its way into the top 5, and that snowball is here. And I don't know if it's going to stop for a while.
Well, the cool thing about this was how unexpected a lot of this was. Like, if you were following this in real time, it was expected Prehm was going to go to Tennessee. You already said Sharma was, it seemed like, heading to Texas. I remember earlier in the week, Brandon Finney, that kind of came out of left field too. We thought that was headed to Penn State. I know there's some Nittany Lion fans who were not thrilled about that, and let some Oregon fans know on our message board. But just like collectively, this was kind of a week of some rabbits pulled out of the hat and some big time prospects. And we'll kind of get into some of the nitty gritty on who these guys are and kind of how they fit with this class. But this is one of the more impressive 2-day stretches, just to kind of talk about Friday and Saturday, where they not only kind of pulled a couple surprises. Like, I had no idea Dorian Brew was about to pop. Like, Matt, Jared, and I all kind of had afternoon commitments that were not football related, that were just like things we were doing on a nice Saturday afternoon in the Willamette Valley. And then suddenly here comes as you said, a composite 5-star recruit, and now the highest rated prospect in the class. So it's been a whirlwind. A lot of this was kind of like going one direction, and then Oregon jumps in and finishes. And you look up and go, this is a top 5 class all of a sudden, and we'll get into it as we go again. But there's a potential for this to continue. The snowball might kind of keep rolling down the hill. They might just continue to pick up steam, and this could look real special. I don't think they're going to get to the top 2 because there's a pretty big gap, but they could continue to move up the leaderboard here as this week goes on, especially if they pull in some of these top guys. I mean, they're in on, as the listeners know, a lot of the best players in the country. And if they close the way they've been closing recently, gosh, this could be really special.
Yeah, and that's, I think, where recruiting at Oregon has been trending for a while, where it felt like 5, 10, a little more than 5 years, probably like 10 years ago, Oregon lands Josiah Sharma and a Brandon Finney, or a Josiah Sharma and a Jordan Davidson. And these two commitments are viewed as like signature pieces to the recruiting class. And to be honest with you, they're not even like top 8 guys right now on the team.
I mean, Matt, Davidson's not even the highest rated running back commit in this class.
Yes. Like Oregon is going. Josh Pate of 24/7 Sports has been on this train for a really long time. I think he's been one of the biggest advocates that things are changing at Oregon under Dan Lanning for the longest time, that recruiting was already at a high level under Mario Cristobal. We have to acknowledge that. But it's going to another tier now. And things are progressing where talent is being accumulated at Oregon faster and deeper, and as well as we've seen at Oregon in a really long time. And it turns into now, like, last year Oregon's class was the best class in school history. They finished 4th in the country in the overall team rankings. They had multiple 5-star players. And you look at this and you say, okay, like Oregon probably, from a 2024 ranking perspective, Oregon had 302 points. We want to look at maybe just like the high school traditional route. Oregon was 3 in the country. They had 293 over 27 verbal commitments. Like you mentioned it, like things could get really special here. It seems kind of silly that we're talking about the second year in a row, the best class in school history. And this one might be significantly better than the previous one.
Yeah, and the thing, just to put one thing into context before we get into the individuals, we just had Bud Elliott on Friday, and he went through the blue chip ratio, and Oregon has a program high of 76% of its players are former 4 or 5-star recruits. This cycle, 12 of 14 are 4 or 5-star recruits. That's 83%. And so you talk about Oregon kind of ascending. It's continuing to happen. And obviously there's, I don't know, this class is probably a little past halfway full. I'm guessing they'll probably take somewhere between 22 and 25. That seems to be kind of the magic number. And so there's going to be guys added, and maybe some of them won't be blue chip kids, but there's a good chance that this class, you look at it and go like over 80% of them are 4 or 5-star prospects. And that's just such a huge gap from where Oregon was recruiting. Certainly when we were like started in this industry
7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago.
Way different. Yeah. I was just talking to someone. This is about to be my 8th year working for Duck Territory. And when we first started, there was all this momentum of like, okay, like they're just coming off a national championship run. Marcus had just been here. Things were kind of excited. There was some excitement level, and obviously there was a dip there for a moment. Right. But you look at where they are now, and it feels extremely sustainable. And it feels like this is not at all a blip in the radar. And I think people around the country are now so frustrated with Oregon. Here's a way to put it, Matt.
Yes.
Remember how when Oregon used to lose a recruit to USC, it was like, oh, they came in with the bag. That's everybody in the country with Oregon now. With all of these kids they just picked up, it's like, oh, Oregon clearly paid these guys. Who cares if that's the case anymore? Because theoretically, you could find a way. It's legal. But regardless, Oregon is such a landing spot that other big former kind of like blue blood type programs, like USC, is convinced that Oregon, the only reason they're getting players is they're paying them, which is very ironic given the history. But that's where we're at right now. Is that the competitors on the recruiting trail are just kind of throwing their hands up in the air, going like, "What the hell's going on? How are we losing all these guys?" And now it's Oregon going in and pulling it, which is so strange.
Texas is saying the same thing about Sharma. Tennessee is saying the same thing about Braun, that Oregon panicked and threw a huge amount of money that didn't make any sense for those schools to match to land these guys, and that's why they're going to Oregon. And you're right. It's the exact same scenario that a lot of people accused USC of when they were in their heyday under Pete Carroll, of landing all these elite talent. Now, like, look, you're gonna miss. You're gonna have guys that don't come to Oregon because you're going after so many big fish, and you're competing against the Ohio States. You know, they got Trajan Odom from North Carolina. He was basically down to Oregon and Ohio State. He went to Ohio State. You're looking at, competing against Alabama, competing against Georgia, competing against LSU for some of these guys. And it's a case where you're going to have, it's going to be momentum waves. Like, you're going to miss in some, multiple guys in a row. It's probably going to happen because you're going after the best of the best. And only a few select schools get these guys. But you're going to have waves where, like you are right now from an Oregon perspective, where everything is going your direction. And you've landed 5 guys in the last couple of days. Let's real quick. Let's start at the bottom. Josiah Sharma, 3-star defensive tackle. He's one of 2 3-star players committed out of 14 to Oregon right now. And to be honest with you, like, Eric and I, we're not involved in the ranking perspectives, but you look at the schools that he was considering, you look at his offer list, and I would just assume that Sharma is a guy that once his senior year is played, once he maybe gets to an all-star game or 2, like, his film's probably going to increase his ranking. I would be surprised if he finishes the year as the 42nd best defensive lineman in the country, just because the schools that he was after, the school he's committed to, and the film that he's produced already, like, I would think he's a candidate to move up.
Composite 4-star too. We should note. 24/7. We have him lower. And again, I say we because I'm wearing the hat. I've got the shirt on. We work for the company, but we aren't involved in the recruiting ranking process at all. Very little input comes from us, so we're not like. But this is a guy who, as you say, like, if you look at, like, it came down to Oregon, Alabama, and Texas. Like, that's a guy who's pretty darn good. And I think Sharma's a really interesting prospect because I think he played his junior year at like 16 years of age. Like, this is a younger guy who's already physically very, very well put together at 6'5", close to 300 pounds. I think I made the comparison just physically. Like, he looks a little bit like Aiden Breland. I think Aiden's maybe a little bit more lean in kind of the midsection, but these are just big physical guys. And I think Sharma has incredible upside, especially to play on the interior. And I think he could put on 20 to 30 pounds and still be really productive. This is a strength, power pass rusher, defensive player. He's not a speed guy. I think he's got decent wheels once he kind of gains some momentum going upfield, but at that size, he so rarely is going to. Runs pretty well though, and he certainly finishes plays. Like, I think there's maybe not quite the twitch that you want to see from like some of the elite, like high 4, 5-star guys, but this guy plays with effort. He tries to finish plays, and again, you're talking about a guy who will probably be at Oregon, and by his freshman year, he'll be newly 18 or something like that. He's a younger prospect, so I think he's really intriguing. I'll be curious to see what happens with the recruiting ranking stuff. I think he's a guy who, when the rankings are put together, they're done in part by NFL potential. I just think he has the body and frame to be an NFL caliber player. It's just going to come down to some of the development stuff. And he's pretty raw, frankly, in terms of some of the technique stuff.
And this is the type of guy you really want to be able to add in this class based on what you've done the last 2 years from a high school recruiting perspective. But if you look at it, like, this is the 3rd year in a row where Oregon has gone out and landed probably a top 5 defensive lineman out west in the cycle. In the previous years, they've landed multiple guys, and they've landed like 1 and 2, I think, last year from a defensive lineman standpoint.
I think all 3 with Johnson, with Braylon Johnson and Rushing. Those are the 3 top guys.
Yes. So from an Oregon perspective, like, you're doing what you should be doing. You're keeping the talent that is out west at a position that's incredibly hard to find talent home, and keeping Josiah Sharma from going out to Texas, playing the SEC. is a big win for Dan Lanning and his company. We've already talked a little bit about Brandon Finney, so we don't really need to go too much in depth here with that. Just another dynamic cornerback prospect from back east that's going to be coming out to Oregon. Real big player to the secondary, and one that could use a lot of retooling after some graduations this coming fall. Now, let's move to Jordan Davidson, 4-star running back, 199 overall player. This is a guy that, quite frankly, there really isn't anyone on the roster besides Jay Harris, and we don't really know how that's going to transition going from D2 to D1 at a Power 5, Power 4 level. That's the same body type as Jordan Davidson, 6 foot, 220 pounds, and there's talk that he's even bigger than that. This is a big body at running back, and like you said, he's almost a top 10 player at the position, and he's not even the best running back on the roster committed to Oregon.
Yeah, this is I love, and I'll talk about in a second. I love the pairing with him and De'Ara Hill. I just think it's perfect, and I'll kind of get to why in a moment. But this is I made this comparison on the website. This is a bell cow running back, not in terms of the talent. People misconstrued this, but in terms of the style of like a Royce Freeman or a Jonathan Stewart. Just big guy, absolutely thrives between the tackles, hard to bring down. He's got some speed to kick it outside. As you said, I think there's some rumors he weighed in closer to like 235 or 240. And I think people were saying that maybe wasn't a great thing. But there's time to reshape that. There's time to get his body to where it needs to be. But, was a very impactful runner at Mater Dei, which is, again, like arguably the best high school football program in the country, certainly out west. And this is somebody who I think has kind of immediate upside to come in and contribute based upon the kind of the program he's developed in, what you see already on tape, and then the size. I mean, I think it's super intriguing and exciting when you can bring in guys who are going to start their college ball already over 220. Like, this is a Big Ten type running back. There's a reason Ohio State and Michigan were two of the other finalists.
Absolutely.
This feels like the kind of guy that you'd play at Wisconsin or something like that, where it's just a big guy who's going to run over your linebackers. He's mean. He's physical. That's the type of running back. And you pair that with De'Ara Hill, who it's been a while since he committed, but I think he scores a touchdown in each of his first 6 minutes of highlights. Legitimately scored 40 touchdowns on the film. I mean, I think he's playing lower ball in kind of the Chicago area, but this is a super a tandem, I should say, of Thunder with Davison, Lightning with Hill. I think these two guys could work really well together, and honestly, it could be really fun to watch that pairing work together.
It's almost like this is too crazy of a comparison because this guy made it to the NFL, and I don't want to throw that expectation before Davidson's even landed at Oregon.
Right.
But Royce Freeman.
Yeah, that's what I compare it just to the physical size. Yeah.
Yes. Physical size for Davidson is Royce Freeman. And then you throw in De'Ara Hill, who to me seems kind of like a similar athlete type guy, like what Braylon Addison was. Remember, Braylon was a running back before he got to Oregon. He was an athlete that played all over the place, and that's kind of what De'Ara Hill did or does.
I kind of like that. It's in terms of more recent guys, and maybe it's just because they're both from Chicago. It's a more of a Bucky-ish guy, size-wise, ability to make guys miss. I think I don't want to take anything away from Bucky, but Bucky was never a straight line speed guy. I think Hill has maybe a little more juice in his legs, but I mean, these are big time prospects, and I don't want to say they're going to be NFL players. You don't want to compare them to guys who are pretty decently drafted. And I know it really frustrated somebody. I compared him. I brought up Jonathan Stewart's name in the film review. It was just to say that physically, these are big guys who run between the tackles. But you wouldn't be surprised. Based on when they're ranked, you wouldn't be surprised if either of these guys ended up being NFL players at some point. It's just too early because they're still going into their senior year of high school.
Yep. Next, the tight end that committed, Deshaun Braun from Derby, Kansas. This is, I think, a critical piece to the class because you needed tight ends. And quite frankly, maybe it changes with Lincoln Cure making his commitment in a couple days. It's trending towards Kansas State. Morgan's tried really hard to get him. But they needed one of the best tight ends in the country to come into this class. And it looked like they were going to get Prehm, and then all of a sudden he kind of swayed a little bit towards Tennessee. Took a visit out there. Things went well. On the Tennessee side, a lot of talk of they thought they had secured him, and then his last trip was out to Oregon, and Dasan commits to Oregon, and this is a top 5 player at the position. He's tied for second all time in program history of highest rated tight end commit right now. We should note, like, Colt Lyerla would be higher, but he was rated as an athlete because schools recruited him at linebacker. Oregon liked him at linebacker or tight end. They just let him pick. And then we should also note, like, Terrence Ferguson isn't in the top 5, and he's starting tight end for Oregon this coming season. But that gives you kind of the idea of what Brahm is bringing to the table of 6'6", 235 pounds. He's physically there to compete at Oregon this fall as what would be a high school senior. Now, is he ready to handle the rigors on a day-to-day basis? That's to be seen, but he's only a high school kid. This is a huge get for Oregon.
I love this kid's film. I mean, it's really exciting to watch him. He's, as you said, 6'6", 235. He's running away from guys in high school, and I'm not going to sit here and like prop up Kansas high school football as being like the elite of the elite in terms of the talent there. I'm sure some of the guys he's running away from aren't going to be playing Division I football. But this is a big guy who can really move. And as I wrote in my film review, I feel like he's kind of almost like a 5-tool tight end in terms of, like, he can do a lot of things. Like, he can win running up the seam. They run him out of the backfield, kind of similar to what we saw a little bit with Kenyon Sadiq in the spring game, because he's really dynamic with the ball in his hands. He catches screens and makes guys miss and gets upfield. He's a good blocker. He can high point the ball really, really well. I mean, there's just kind of all the little intangibles you're looking for at the position. I think he's really good at. And so I think it's a really high ceiling player. I think based on the size, like you said, and Oregon's needs for immediate contributions for this particular positions with Ferguson and Herbert out after the year, I think this is a guy who could immediately be in your 2 deep, depending upon what they do in the portal, depending upon Kenyon Sadiq's development. I think Kenyon is going to be the focal point as a pass catcher at the position starting in 25. And I think, frankly, in 24, I think Sadiq's going to be pretty involved. But this is a different type of player athletically, just from a size perspective, just from a kind of a weight and heft perspective. And I think this is a really, really exciting get. And to your point, Matt, like, if they would have missed on him, Lincoln Cure, and then Caleb Edwards, who are 3 of the top 6 or 7 tight ends in the country, who all just visited in the last 2 or 3 weeks, you kind of would have been in a weird spot. There aren't a lot of, like, I know Baron Naone, who just committed to Washington, who's an in-state kid, he's a top-rated kid. Like, maybe they would have kicked the tires on him, but you would have been going from the elites of the elites to a guy kind of a rung down middle at a tier. Position, middle tier, at a position of huge need. So I think this is really, really significant. And frankly, in terms of the guys they landed in the last couple of days, I think this is the most important one, even though he's not as highly rated as Brew.
Yeah, that's a good point, because now all of a sudden you've got Kenyon Sadiq next year. You have AJ Plugiano, Roger Sagapala, and now Sam Brahm. Like, now you don't have to go to the portal unless
or you have to take one guy rather than multiple.
Yes. Like, I was gonna say, now you don't have to, but only if you feel like you need, you want to have that other guy. Because if they had missed on Brahm, they missed on Cure, like you said, and they missed on Edwards, now it becomes a necessity of, you need to find a guy that can be a starter caliber tight end, and you need to find a portal depth guy. Now it's simply just probably portal depth guy that maybe could push himself into that starting spot. Because you've got some insane talent at the tight end position now. Last but not least, most recent, Dorian Brew, composite 5-star, a top 10 player at his position, 61st overall in the country by 24/7 Sports. Also runs track, posts really good numbers there in the state of Texas. His father is an Olympic gold medalist in the 4x400 relay, a bronze medalist in the 400. His mother was a sprinter at Ohio State, who's also in the Ohio State Athletics Hall of Fame. So you have added a player who comes from a family of sprinters, elite sprinters, world-class sprinters, and he carries similar traits. He does the 200 meters. He does the 100 meters. He's on the relay teams. We're getting to the point where Oregon football could have its own relay team competing for the track and field program at Oregon in the spring because of who they've added the last couple of years. Dorian Brew, another corner that's going to come to Oregon with elite speed and elite coverage skills and a tremendous athlete.
And as you said, an Ohio State legacy recruit who is going to Oregon, and Ohio State, who I know has, I think the top 2 corners in the country committed already. But this is a guy they wanted. That's not mistaken. This is a guy who's a 5-star for a reason. They wanted to land him as well. And he goes to Oregon, which, again, if you're making Ohio State mad on the recruiting trail with a kid that his parents went to Ohio State, or at least one of them did, that's pretty darn impressive. So, I think he's really intriguing. You watch his film and it's interesting because that track speed doesn't show up because he just never gets beaten and he never has to run. It's a 2.5 minute film. I think it's only the first half of his junior season, but it's primarily him just being really physical in press coverage, disrupting routes, stopping guys from getting open, eliminating receivers from the field, and then coming off his guy to just obliterate guys in terms of run support or coming off and breaking up a pass for another target. So he's a 5-star for a reason based on the composite. He's a top, the 61st best player, I think, in our rankings at 24/7. Those feel deserved. He's 6'2" already. So he's got physical size. Somebody on the board asked me after the film review if could he be a fit at safety? And I'd say, maybe physically, but guys who have this sort of coverage skills, I think you just want to keep him on the outside and just have him eliminate guys. And frankly, because of his size already, and he's long for 6 feet, he's got long arms. I just look at him and think, is this a guy who could play pretty early? And Oregon might have a need for that. As we talked about, Jabbar Muhammad is gone. Cam Alexander's gone. Dante Manning is gone. Nico Reed is gone. These are 4 of your primary corners probably this year are all going to be gone. And there's a ton of talent, a lot of young guys. There's going to be a lot of competition for playing time. But Brew, assuming this holds up through signing day, to me feels like a guy who could absolutely be competing to start or be in your 2 deep immediately. I don't know if this is a guy who redshirts. Is kind of where I'm at, I guess.
Yeah, and the problem is it goes back to kind of what you referenced with our conversation with Bud Elliott earlier this week about where are the holes on this defense. Oregon's, and this is the beauty of where they're at right now. They're adding guys that, in normal cases, you go, oh, he's an automatic piece to at least play special teams in limited minutes here and there in every game. I'm agreeing with you that I think Dorian Brew is going to play right away as a true freshman, but it's not guaranteed because you look at the guys that they've added the years prior, they're just as good. And it's going to be hard for Brew. It's going to be hard for Braun. It's going to be hard for Davidson to show up and carve out a role as a true freshman beyond the 4 games that they're allowed and still be able to redshirt than it was the case 7 years ago, 6 years ago, when it was very clear you land a top 240 player, he's more than likely going to have to play as a true freshman. That's not the case anymore at Oregon.
And here's the kind of stat to prove that. Oregon under Dan Lanning has had 2 true freshmen start games, and one was Poncho in the bowl game, which was just filling in for a guy who was the Remington Award winner who wasn't playing in the game. So, and that's to your point, with the recruiting rankings being and the recruiting classes being better than ever. So they're bringing in better players and they're not playing as much early. And that speaks to just the total depth of the roster and the talent that is everywhere here. I mean, Oregon is so deep right now. And again, our conversation with Bud, I thought, kind of illustrated that point.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll dive into kind of what could come next because it's been crazy and it could continue to be crazy for the Ducks. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Because there's a lot going on, this podcast is obviously going a little bit longer than we thought, but we needed to dive into what could come next. And it starts with maybe later today. Noah McHale gives a verbal commitment. Oregon, USC, Texas A&M the favorites. But like Eric and I were talking about off recording, like the way Oregon's playing, I don't think we can count the Ducks out. And we already weren't, but this isn't like how it's gone lately. This isn't a case where it's just locked shut and Oregon's out and done. But after McHale, Eric, we joked like there could be another 5 or 6 days of string of commitments for the Ducks.
It's like I was just trying to map out the week, and it was like, oh, there's a guy announcing here, there's a guy announcing there, there's a guy announcing here. Matt, you're gonna have to help me out with some of the order here because there's so many names. But is Lincoln Cure, is he the first one is that on Monday? I'm just
Yes, yeah. Lincoln Cure will be he'll be committing July 1st, and then also on the same day, Lincoln Cure, a 5-star tight end, Goodland High School in Kansas, a guy that's got Oregon in his top group. And the same day, Gavin Nix, a 4-star linebacker from Florida, a top 100 player, he also will be committing to a school, and Oregon is in the picture there as well. And then from there, we get one on the 2nd of July 2nd, Caleb Edwards, another tight end, top 6 player at his position from California. He'll be committing to a school on the 2nd. And then Justin Hill the next day, a 4-star edge player from Ohio, on July 3rd. He will be committing. Amarian Robinson on the 6th of July. So we get the 4th off potentially. We get the 5th off potentially.
Oh, wouldn't that be great, Matt? To just not have. I'm just kidding because we want them to get players. It'd be nice to have a bit of a time to exhale a little bit.
And then Amarian Robinson, a 3-star safety. Oregon kind of feels like the favorite here. We'll see what happens. And then Chris Lawson on July 7th. And look, like we talked about when he pushed his commitment back, it was probably he's waiting to see what kind of room Oregon has. This is going to show kind of what the room Oregon's going to have. Like if they add a Cure or if they add an Edwards to go with Braun, if they go out and they add Nix and they add a Robinson, and they're still in the picture for guys like at receiver, guys like Dorian Moore, it's going to be hard to see Oregon go out and say like, yeah, like Chris, we have room for you, because they're already have players at the receiver position. They're in the thick of it for Dorian Moore, a 5-star, number 1 receiver in the country. And then you go to the defensive side of the football, and they've now added Brew, they've added Brandon Finney. They could add Amarian Robinson into the mix here. It's looking like very quickly we were joking like, hey, they only got 9 commitments, to now you just run through the pecking order here. If things fall right, like they could be really, really close to being done.
Yeah, no, I mean, we could get to 20 commitments by like July 7th, potentially. And to your point on Lawson, I think that's what he chooses to do. And I hope this doesn't come across as kind of like arrogant, because obviously he's interested in Washington. They have the crystal ball advantage right now. But I think if Oregon wants Chris Lawson, they're going to get Chris Lawson. And I think where he ends up going is going to tip their hand a little bit with where they think they are with Dorian Moore. And I know Moore is a guy you take regardless, but to a certain degree here, it's like if they think they've got a really good chance to add more. I don't know what Michael Terry III is, by the way, from a position. Like, is he a running back? Is he a tight end? Is he a receiver? Is he all of them? Like, he basically plays everywhere in offense. But, I think where Lawson goes is going to give you a better idea of where Oregon thinks they are with some of these other skill position players. And that's going to be one to watch, even if it doesn't go Oregon's way. Because I think, like, in a weird way, like, regardless of outcome, it's going to be a positive, because you're going to end up getting a really good player in Lawson if he does pick Oregon. But if he goes to Washington, I think it's going to give you an idea that Oregon is really feeling strong about where they're at with some of these other receivers. And look, this receiving class is going to be awesome, kind of almost regardless of if they add Lawson or if they add Dorian Moore. And you look at what they've got already. Like, I love Dallas Wilson's film. Isaiah Mosey is extremely explosive, awesome in the open field. And then Cooper Perry, like, man, like this is really good stuff they've already got going here. And if they add Lawson, if they add Moore, if they add Terry or whatnot, like things are shaping up very healthy at the receiver position. And again, Junior Adams, he's getting it done.
Yep. All right, real quick. You'll have a piece later on today coming out on just kind of what you're looking at from a recruiting perspective of needs to fill based off of the current roster and the current commit list. Let's just maybe, we don't need to dive into everything, but maybe what's 1 or 2 spots that you feel like highly need to get addressed, if any? Or is it just finding more talent and just simply adding it?
Two positions kind of haven't been addressed, depending upon what you think Nasir Wyatt is. I think he's probably more of an edge than a true inside linebacker. So I think getting a linebacker is pivotal. They're in on McHale. They're in on Nix. I think there's a good chance to get one of them, and that will fill some of that in short order. Safety's the one where there's not quite as like direct, like they don't have a safety committed. And I know Trey McNutt is drawing some. Sounds like that's a 5-star, like about as good of a safety in the country. Oregon is reportedly in pretty good shape there. But that's a position I think you have to fill. And especially because as we talked about with tight end, like you're going to lose who we project as the two starting safeties in Ty Sheem and Kobe Savage this upcoming offseason. Aaron Flowers looks like a guy who's going to be ready to play right away. I think both Kingston Lopa and Peyton Woodyard are young players. And then I'll throw I shouldn't exclude Tyler Turner. Those are three interesting young safeties, but if they can get a McNutt or somebody of that caliber who could play right away, that's going to be really big for shoring up the safety position where they maybe don't have to go portal again, because they've had to go portal pretty heavy the last couple of years at that position. And I'm guessing you'd like to be able to have some development there and guys that you're able to kind of build up as opposed to just doing one and dones every year at the position.
Yeah, you need to start developing some of that depth. You can't rely on every year hitting home runs, and they've done that. They've gone out and done it, but eventually you won't hit, and eventually you'll miss, and you'll have to take a couple guys that maybe aren't at the same tier that they've previously landed, and it could come back and hurt you. So I would agree, like safety absolutely needs to get hit. And one area that I would just be curious to look at, from my perspective, is Oregon has tried to sign a second quarterback in this class. It's one that's an interesting one. I'm not 100% sure why, but they've gone out and they've targeted multiple guys at that position. I'll be curious to see, like, is there another name that pops up? Do they try and flip a guy? They've been linked with Hussein Longstreet from Corona, California. He's currently committed to A&M. We'll see what happens there. But they tried to get Keelan Russell from Duncanville, Texas. He flipped to Alabama. They've been tied in with Malik Washington from Maryland. I think he just recently committed to Maryland. Ty Hawkins is currently committed to TCU, and he's from San Antonio, Texas. They've been linked there as well. It's just one where there's enough movement here where they are clearly on board with Akili Smith Jr. And he's very clearly on board with Oregon, but they've continued to kind of circle around and look at the quarterback options in 2025 to see if they could add a second one. And that's just one that's not a need, but it's just something that's interesting to me.
That's a good one, Matt. Because you look at, they only tripped Akili this summer in terms of official visitors. So on face value, you'd say, oh no, they're done. They're all in on Akili. But to your point, like even think about last year where they had, before Van Buren flipped, they were going to take two quarterbacks, it looked like. And I think with the way quarterback recruiting is going and the way this works with players leaving through the portal, kind of using a term that I liked from Bud was take a moonshot. Go out there and throw a dart up on the board at quarterback. And I know you think you've got between Dante Moore and Austin Novosad a guy for 25 and maybe 26 and 27 or something like that in terms of recruiting or in terms of quarterback position. Go out there and throw up a shot and see what you can get. Like Akili, I think, is going to be a really good player. I'm really excited. I think the fact that he's a legacy is awesome, but there's some guys out there that are really intriguing. And if you can bring in and have a 4 or 5 player room and have some really young, intriguing guys who are pushing the older guys, that doesn't hurt. And of course, you also know you're probably going to lose a couple guys to the portal because they want to play. And that's the one position where there's kind of non-negotiable. You're not going to play two quarterbacks almost at all. There's a reason Arch Manning has been sitting behind Quinn Ewers now for 2 seasons at Texas.
That's going to do it for us on this edition of the podcast. And shoot, we might be back on Monday. We might be back on Tuesday doing another one, considering how Noah McHale, Lincoln Cure, also There's one more I'm missing.
You said Gavin Nix.
Yeah, Gavin Nix. All those guys commit in the next 2 days. So we might be back here again doing another verbal commitment breakdown of a couple guys that have joined the flock here for the Oregon Ducks. But until then, hope you enjoyed this edition of the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Go to duckterritory.com for more coverage of it. But we'll be back later this week with another one. You've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.